Connor McLennan, and this is our presentation on the Modernist period in literature. So, the Modernist period started in the mid-1880s and lasted all the way until the 1940s. It is a period characterized by rapid change in society and technology and violence.
In modernism, the atrocities of World War I really was what put the time period to a head, because people wanted to think of a utopian society because of all the bad things that happened in World War I.
It is also believed that modernism started with the rise of rapid industrialization. This mirrors the characteristic of formalism as well, based on a dystopian view of society or a view of moving forward utilitarianism, reflected by the emphasis on formalism. The main characteristics of modernist literature are individualism, experimentation, absurdity, symbolism, and formalism. So, can you tell me about individualism?
Yes, it was one of the main themes of the modernism period because authors focused on the individual versus the world, as an individual struggle was seen as more important than society as a whole.
And can you agree that the individualist kind of characteristic was also characterized by individual versus world format and storytelling?
Yes, that helped tell a good story.
Awesome.
Tell me about another theme of modernism.
So, another theme of modernism is experimentation. So, modernist authors and poets broke free from the old forms that they used in periods past. So, an example of this is T.S. Eliot's Hollow Man. I actually have it pulled up right here on this iPhone.
Very good. We want to hear it.
Eyes I dare not meet in dreams, in death's dream kingdom, these do not appear, there the suns are. So just from that short excerpt, we can kind of tell that it's more free verse versus a traditional rhyme scheme that was very popular in the past before the period. So,
Again, expressing individuality amongst the writers as well as the people they talk about.
all right, can you tell me about absurdity in the modernist period?
So, absurdity was going again the idea with the free verse, as writers were doing anything they felt they wanted to. There was not a lot of structure and ideas of books or in themes. For example, Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis features a traveling salesman transforming into an insect-like creature. It's kind of modernism, absurdism, like me holding this piano.
Another characteristic of modernism is symbolism. So, modernist writers infused objects, people, overall ordinary things with significant meanings. So, they imagined a reality with multiple layers, made them hidden or in a sort of code.
It's a hard word.
So, an example of this is James Joyce's Ulysses. So, in each chapter, it incorporates symbols into kind of ordinary things. So, another characteristic of modernism is formalism. Writers saw literature more as a craft than a flowing of creativity that it once was. This kind of mirrors the age of industrialization, which industrialization on its own has many characteristics that lie in formalism. All right, William Faulkner was born in 1897 in New Albany, Mississippi. Some of his famous books are The Sound and the Fury, as we discussed, As I Lay Dying, and Absalom, Absalom. Another modernist author is James Augustine Aloysius Joyce, otherwise known as James Joyce. He was born in Rathgar, Ireland, and some of his famous books are Ulysses, as we discussed, Dubliners, and Finnegan's Wake.
Thomas Stearns Eliot was born on September 26, 1888, in St. Louis, Missouri. He died January 4th, 1965, in London, England, and he was an American English poet, playwright, literary critic, etc., of the modernist movement in poetry, and he had such works as The Wasteland in 1922 and 4 quartets in 1943. He was very, very essential to the movement. Like I mentioned earlier, Ezra Pound really had a high regard for Mr. Eliot, as well as, I guess, most of the people who consumed parts of the modernist period, and the poets and authors of the time in general.
James Joyce's Ulysses is a perfect example of a modernist novel, in that it focuses on something seemingly ordinary in the day of the life of Leopold Bloom. And it explains his life as something that is strange and really weird. And so the novel was considered revolutionary. This is an example of the theme of the stream of consciousness, as irony, satire, and things that are used to point out how we live in a social world.
T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland really represents the time period of the modernist movement. Ezra Pound called it the signifying poem of the movement. And the reason is T.S. Eliot himself describes it as rhythmically spurring of his own emotional conscience. And it was the idea of the individual speaking out for the group. But it really went to the entire Western culture, because one of the big themes is World War I and the modernist movement. That is just one of the things we have to keep in track in our minds when we're thinking about the movement. And this poem was talking about, the sexuality and how that part has kind of died, the relationship with it, and it was very freelance. And so those kind of things that Eliot had on his mind really portrayed kind of the struggles of the self in the world that we lived in post-World War I.
William Faulkner's The Sound and Fury explores the theme of time. In this novel, William Faulkner shifts the narrative years backwards or forwards mid-paragraph, and this represents the theme of the stream of consciousness. This also represents a minor theme of this time period, of looking backwards in time, as people in the public were looking back in time to a period before the devastation of both world wars